Welcome to another episode of Legal for Tech, the podcast. So, guys, you do recognize my voice. It's always Rosie here. And as I've said many times, this is just a group of students and young professionals who are very interested in anything that has to do with technology and, yes, its regulation. So, today I am joined again by my great friend and producer of the show, Giacomo Di Gregorio. Hi, Jack.
Hi, Rosie. Very happy to be here.
Very happy as well. And you actually brought us a very interesting person to interview. I'm super happy to actually talk to this acquaintance of yours. Hi, Patrick Grady. Great to see you and welcome on the show.
Hi, Rosie. Yes, thank you both for having me. Excited to get started.
I'm very excited to know more about your career. I was looking at your CV earlier, of course, and I'm super curious to know what you've been going on and how you came across this path. So, tell our listeners a bit more about yourself, why you're here, and what has brought you into this position. And yeah, you're calling from Brussels, so even more exciting.
Yeah, calling from Brussels. Had the chance also to work in the Netherlands and Hungary, also on tech policy. But I've always been in tech policy. I'm a hardcore tech policy guy, but a bit of a chameleon with where I've worked. So I started off working, just studying these issues in academia through both philosophy and then political science. Then working for an NGO, then for a think tank, then the private sector. I was also briefly freelance, and then I arrived here in my latest role, where I'm in a trade association. So we have member companies, and we're a center left tech coalition. We're advocating for progressive technology policy.
Entering directly into the topics that we want to discuss, let's discuss about this simplification that is going around Brussels right now. Simplification can be interpreted now as deregulation or poor administrative tidying. From your work with organizations navigating EU tech rules, what do you think is this simplification agenda really about, and what are the main misconceptions that you encounter?
Well, let me start by saying I mean, it's not super simple. There's some quite large regulations being discussed to try and I think clarify different digital rules that we have in the EU. Maybe it should be called the clarification agenda. Okay, so what does it try and do? I think on the one hand, at the political level, it's a kind of signal. It's a signal that the EU is trying to do something a bit different, that it's responding to some of the criticism and its own reflections on how it should approach governance in this new geopolitical world. It's also hopefully a signal to companies and startups that the environment in Brussels will be slightly easier to navigate. Um, so it's the EU's in this process of looking in the mirror and seeing what it can do to make its rule book a bit simpler. One of the misconceptions, I suppose, besides just the fact that it's not super simple, is you hear a lot of criticisms that this is an agenda being driven from outside, from foreign companies who find it too difficult to operate in Brussels, in the EU, I should say. Now that's also true. Like there are plenty of complaints coming from foreign companies about how difficult it can be sometimes. But the misconception is that it's just those companies. The truth is, it's actually European companies who are saying this as well, and especially I think the smallest companies who are spending more time than they want to be on hiring lawyers. No offense, guys, and focusing on compliance instead of like innovating on products. So, yeah, I think a lot of these critics, I think, are not doing justice to European concerns and some of those interests they claim to represent.
Hmm. It's really difficult to navigate the landscape in the digital omnibus, and I think you correctly pointed out it's not a simple document. It's a very long document, and then if we also look at the body of the amendments from the Parliament, and then, for example, the joint opinion of the DPP DPS,
Mm.
it's a whole kind of bulk of documents. I think it's very difficult to see where it's heading in the end. Um, However, I like. Do you really think, and on that, I think I'm being a bit provocative here. Do you really think that smaller companies, SMEs, have really got the winning point if if the digital omnibus actually comes into force. Because yes, they would be helped, but other things like, mass data collectors, like social media companies, like
Mm.
AI companies, of course, they would have it much easier. Do you really think that SMEs in Europe, small startups that do tech, that do AI, potentially will have it easier here?
Yeah, so look at it from the perspective of one of the big companies. If if they're operating all over Europe and there's a new regulation that causes a bit of a headache internally, they already have these massive legal teams that can deal with that, and some extent it becomes just part of the operating costs for them. If you're a smaller company, that could be the difference between going to market and not going to market. So it's just a much higher percentage of their overall costs. And then there's research already we have from, if I look at the GDPR, that it disproportionately hurts SMEs, exactly because of this.
So about the digital omnibus, the digital omnibus right now it seems a package that sounds very, very technical. What is
Mm.
actually trying to achieve from your point of view, and what were the key political or institutional drivers for bundling this change into a single omnibus file rather than reopening each law individually?
Yeah, so just maybe in case it's helpful for listeners as well, there's so many of these buzzwords now. So the EU had what it was calling like a competitiveness agenda, so it wanted to compete more effectively globally, like economically. Then we had a simplification package, and part of the package is these omnibuses. So there's like an omnibus for climate, there's an omnibus for digital, and I think there's 10 in total. There's one for defense sector as well. So on the digital one, the idea with the omnibus, rather than addressing and trying to revise many of these laws individually, you can assess them all at once. Um, which would be more efficient on the one hand, and also on the other hand, it's just like necessary in some cases. So if I take the if I take the example of cookie banners, so this is something that I'm sure you've been annoyed by in the past. I think even the people who are most privacy conscious will have at one point just smashed that like accept all button because it's so annoying. Um, and also annoying for companies. They don't want to put up these hurdles. So this is something that the European Commission wants to tackle. The issue is it's the reason we have these pop-ups is in part because of the privacy directive and in part because of GDPR creating that need for the consent mechanism. So if you want to look at cookie banners, you have to look at the way those two bills interact, and that's some of the reasons we see these different laws being bundled together in this omnibus. One exception is so there's also a separate AI omnibus, and there's a few different things that are being looked at, but the main one is the deadline by which companies have to comply with some of the most stringent obligations in the AI Act. And the reason that's being separated out from the digital omnibus is because some of those deadlines are like this August, like in a few months' time. So it's being like super fast streamed, and still it's not clear whether it's gonna pass in time to affect the laws that it's reviewing, which is a very confusing situation, especially for companies.
But like, I think that's an issue with digital omnibuses, and I think you've framed it very nicely there. Um, it is an issue of clarification. Even the EDPB and EDPS have agreed to the point that there must be kind of format documents for the DPA, for example.
Mm.
There must be format documents for the notification to inform users of the potential of data processing, because it's very difficult for each company, especially when they're small companies, to take care of that. Um, and it is kind of the same with
Rosie,
the AI, of
you're right.
course.
It is harder for small companies. I think you're now agreeing with the point from before.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I'm the first one that agrees with the idea that companies need to be helped, and especially when we are in Europe. The issue that I think was quite clear also by, for example, reading the amendments to the AI omnibus, the ones that were made public and available from the parliament, is that the GDPR, the AI Act, these are general regulations. And if you make it easier for everyone, that was my point before. And I think we need to look at how the European market specifically is helped. Because if you make it easier for everyone, you make it easier even for those who already have an advantage. Like, I think that's the big problem that potentially can be
Ah,
associated with having an omnibus, which is, and again, a blanket bundle. It's not a specific, sector specific and sector driven kind of regulation.
yeah. I think that could be a risk, and I think it's maybe just it says something about the weight of political pressure for the EU to do something different. That we're maybe seeing something that does look like super encompassing, and ideally, again, as I said before, we would look at everything individually and make sure that we get the impacts right. So. Yeah, I think it just says a lot about what was needed maybe from the EU in terms of strategy.
Okay, that's a really interesting perspective. I also wanted to ask you, since we are here talking about a bit more of what you do in terms of your career, let's talk about the DG Progress project that you're running. We want to know something more about it, and so we can ask you more questions about it, since I think it's very much connected to what we're talking about.
Yeah, sure. So, DigiProgress is a project of Chamber of Progress. For those that don't know, like Digis or Directorate Generals are the names of ministries basically in the EU. We didn't see a ministry yet for that's looking specifically at consumer, economic, and social progress. So we set up DigiProgress. One of the things we notice is that there's a lot of negativity around, on the one hand, just technology in general, but on the other hand, about Europe's prospects. There's lots of things we see that are positive about Europe's tech ecosystem, like its talent, its speciality in certain sectors. Some encouraging signs about the level of venture capital that's flowing in. So we see a lot of positivity. We want to use DigiProgress as a platform to advocate for these founders and for these innovators in Europe, to give them a kind of bridge to policymakers here in Brussels. And as we've started mingling with these folks, we've also become very interested in specific policies as well, particularly the 28th regime.
Yeah, you mentioned it. So we are not, at least I'm not very familiar with the 28 regime. So could you tell us more, like what is it about? And do you think from the talks till now, it will be able to achieve the goals?
Um, yes. So let me start by saying I don't know whether you've tried to set up a business in I think Germany or in Belgium. Um, I tried it once a few years ago. I was chatting to an accountant about it. It was going to take several months and cost several thousand euros. Much of this money is going to a notary that I will never meet. It's a nightmare. Like it's and you don't. I think you don't appreciate the situation until you try in other places. Like I know in the UK, for example, it's within 24 hours. You can do it online. There's no need for paperwork. I think it's like 50 euros. It's the difference is dramatic. I'm sure in places like Estonia, it could be even better. So just want to put that fact out there for now. We might look back to it. The 28th regime recognizes that if you're a company in Lithuania and you want to start doing business in Portugal, you have to look. Let's say in Lithuania you've incorporated there, you're abiding by the labor and tax laws of Lithuania. If you then want to do business in Portugal, you have to set up your company again in Portugal because they're not going to recognize your company that you set up in Lithuania, and then start abiding by different tax and labor laws. Now, you then have to do that in 26 other countries to operate in the whole market, which is a nightmare. Compare that to somewhere like the States, where many people set up their company in Delaware, and they can immediately access all 50 states. So what the EU wanted to do, and this isn't a totally new idea, is to make it easier for a company to operate across the to scale across the market, and also to just make it easier to attract investment across the single market. So rather than have 27 different regimes, there will be a 28th regime, and this is a an optional set of laws that the companies can sign up to, like incorporate with, and then they will be recognized across the block. Now, in practice, it's really hard to get different stakeholders to agree to this because if let's take each of the laws separately. So if it's the labor laws, we know what's going to happen if a company can, the trade unions are worried that companies are going to go to areas with just the lowest, least protective labor laws. If it's a taxation problem, well, then we have a problem where everyone floats to Ireland or whatever just to go to whatever the taxation laws are most friendly. So for that reason, it was proved to be quite controversial, these two other elements. But the first element, just setting up your company and it being recognized in different member states, that's something that I think will go ahead. And there's a lot of political momentum for this, and also momentum from the startup and investor community that I mentioned earlier. There's a parallel campaign called EU Inc. Again, it's the idea of having, rather than a separate incorporation, having a EU level thing. And I mean, for the purpose of this discussion, it's essentially the same thing as 28th regime, but it's being led by this grassroots movement of like founders and investors, really fun, wild group of people. They're really into their memes. So we're trying to work with them a little bit through DigiProgress. We interviewed one of the initiators in our first newsletter, and for our next one, which I think in about half an hour, we'll be interviewing hopefully an MEP who's supporting this campaign as well, and that will feature that in our next one. So yeah, we're super on board with EU Inc. 28th regime. I think if you're a European who believes in a bigger federal Europe, you're on board. I think if you're somebody who thinks you want to make life easier for startups and SMEs, you're on board. If you're just a Europhile, you're on board. So it's a really it's an exciting initiative we're following.
That's brilliant, Patrick. And sometimes legal for tech is also the point and the kind of best means for a little bit of plugging. So please tell us listeners something more about your newsletter, at least the title, so they can go follow you.
Yeah, I mean, I've been shamelessly plugging for at least 5 minutes, but okay, so it's called DigiProgress. You'll find us on Substack. You'll also find us active on LinkedIn, X. I think we're still seeing a bunch of people on X, which is maybe surprising, and Blue Sky. So follow us wherever you can there, and you'll find those links, I think, through my profile if you can't find them organically.
That's a brilliant plug. Well done. I wanted to ask you then, in this context of the 28th regime, we are also potentially seeing that AI tools and AI workflow streaming, for example, can be very helpful. As you correctly pointed out, there is this kind of issue with, let's say, labor law being different across countries. And, if you can potentially deploy AI tools a bit more, it can be a bit more useful. Would you say that that's also maybe in the Commission's, or at least in the United Europe kind of ideal, or do you think that tech has nothing to do with this?
No, I think anything that can reduce the complexity. So if AI tools can do that, then great. Yeah, I think to question is it in the thinking? I think it is. I think I read something about this week that the Commission was exploring something like that. So yeah, I think it's definitely in the thinking. Yeah.
Right, that's super, super interesting. And talking about technology and about how to make it better for the people that use it as well. I've heard that you are very interested and very knowledgeable in what's called the digital fitness check. So I'm going to ask you about what kind of review of the digital rulebook in the European Union that has to do with, and also what kind of opportunities are you seeing within the broader scope of simplification, thinking of the 28th regime, thinking of what we've talked about today. So the Digital Omnibus 28th regime, the potential for new regulations, the potential for avoiding new regulation, like, for example, the AI Liability Directive was not passed by the European Commission. Let's kind of put this all together and do a fitness check.
Yeah, sure. So sorry, by the way, I was chuckling while you were speaking because you said I was very knowledgeable about this, and I think that's very generous. But so yeah, we're in the process now of working out how to. We're going to Chamber of Progress will be submitting a response to the consultation on the digital fitness check. Um, it's the way we're understanding it, and speaking also to some other stakeholders here. It's a look at simplifying the digital rulebook that is everything that's not included in the omnibus. So there are a bunch of other topics. I think you listed some of them. We have this upcoming Digital Fairness Act, which this might be an opportunity to say something about that. Um, we There are other issues related to the rulebook being complex that are not covered by individual regulations. So just the overall approach to regulating, like should there be different kinds of impact assessments, also recommendations from the Draghi and Letter report that you may be familiar with. Are there different kinds of definitions that need to be harmonized? Certainly something like, targeted advertising, personalization. These are concepts that you see floating across GDPR, AI Act, DSA, and it's not clear like sometimes how those definitions interact with each other. So yeah, it's a kind of broader look at the digital rulebook. And one more thing I would add is I mentioned earlier the AI omnibus is mostly, not wholly, focused on the issue of timelines and deadlines. Um, Speaking with somebody from Parliament last month, they said, well, the digital fitness check might be an opportunity to look at the AI Act in a broader sense. So not just focus on the issues that are being tackled in the omnibus that's going on now.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I mean, it's always good when these kind of projects are being run because I think sometimes laws are made in a room and then, yeah, you kind of consult with some stakeholders, but obviously there are deadlines and stuff, and then the law comes out and then you kind of see how it gets implemented in practice. I think when we think about the GDPR, I do think that the legislator wasn't thinking that something like DPIA could take so much time. And we as well, at Legal for Tech, we have some of our colleagues that have been working as kind of in-house lawyers for a lot of time, and they hated the process. It was like, oh my gosh, I have to do another DBA. That was the conversation
Yeah.
that was going
Yeah,
on.
and sometimes it's making that's a good point because one of the things we need to do is to make that simpler and more uniform to do. But also the other thing that GDPR didn't like quite anticipate, as you would expect, is the use of data for training AI models. And so we had this strange situation, was it last year or the year before, where some member states were like shutting down OpenAI or going after them, or other companies, and other different products were not coming to the EU and really that should be clarified at the EU level from the European Data Protection Board. And you don't want a market where if you're a foreign company, you don't know whether your product is allowed, and there are disagreements within different member states. Like that's not ideal. So yeah, this fitness check might be an opportunity to look at how to make some of the enforcement decisions a bit simpler as well.
That's a very good point, and I love how you said some countries. Yeah, the first one that shut down famously ChatGPT was Italy.
Yeah.
So for us, it was like,
Well done,
yeah,
Giacomo.
he worked first or something. But no, I do agree with you, and it's a very interesting point that you made, especially focusing on AI on this part on LLMs. Of course, AI is a broader concept than what we usually identified with. Um, and
Mm.
I'm very interested in what you think about data in this specific field because, AI technology sounds like it's something new and innovative, and of course it is, but a lot of it, I mean, most of it is dependent on data and data sets. And I think that the point of the Commission and in general of the European kind of legislative bodies is trying to find the key that puts together the use of data and data protection with the kind of new technology and new possibilities that this new emerging branch of automation kind of is bringing. So I was curious to know from you. Do you think that less protection or like a different type of protection should be given to the personal data that gets input into AI? Do you think we can talk about personal data at all when we talk about LLMs?
Um, yeah, I think we just have to be aware of the trade-offs. Like, what happens if we're not using European data in LLMs? We're going to find we're using very like Americanized LLMs that are talking about sidewalks instead of pavements and us saying howdy and things that are alien to us Europeans. So I think, we if we want European outputs, we need European inputs on the one hand, and then on the other hand, it's just a case of, you're right to flag that data is very important for these AI models to compete. If we want Mistral to be one of the leading AI companies, it also needs access to personal data, and so. But yeah, finding the right mechanisms to do so is something that's going to be this it is part of this omnibus, and these conversations are still ongoing. I think it's just a shame the conversation around AI has changed so much in my time in Brussels. I was here in yeah, you have to bear in mind the AI Act when it was designed. If you look at the impact assessment that was meant to inform it, there's no mention of LLMs. There's no mention of general purpose AI. There's no mention. So I witnessed this bill being created with a very different understanding of what AI is, what it can do, what it can't do. And then we had this series of negotiations where then ChatGPT launched, and everyone became very panicked. It was going to be the end of education. There was the end of democracy, a disinformation apocalypse. Artists are no longer going to have jobs, and it's just okay. So 2 years later, we have a very different understanding of AI, and now we're looking at it as like a geopolitical tool, and now we really want to be really good at AI. But the problem is we've already implemented this very comprehensive bill that's like not super helpful at times. Even the person who wrote the act in the European Commission had this shocking interview last summer where he said, "I'm not even sure it should be regulated," and I was under a lot of pressure to put this through, and it's so disappointing. It's also disappointing if you care about risks, because if we were sensible, we would have looked at some areas. I think now we're calling it nudification of AI being used for nudification, and it's something that that wasn't part of the discussion during the AI Act. I was writing, if in a former role, we were writing about. AI being used for nudification and how AI Act needed to address that. But if you're talking about a bill that covers everything, it's really hard to get those like really surgical items on the table. Um, Sorry, I went on a rant on AI in the end. But yes, data is very important. Thank you.
I love that conclusion. Data is very important. Yeah, and let us do a plug, a quick one here. Like we also talked to an MEP on this point, Alexandra Gese. The interview is coming out on the 8th of March, because we talked about nudification and the role of AI and the role of, in general, kind of putting the role of women in the context of digital society and digital technology, which is a very interesting topic to learn about, especially when thinking about who benefits from simplification, for
Yeah,
example. That's
it's also a big it's a democratic issue as well, because if there are fewer women in public life and political life, these tools are often used to weaponize and demoralize people who are trying to achieve those roles. So yeah, I think it's a very important issue, and I know that the gender-based violence directive will be, I think, enforceable from next year, which will make some of this behavior illegal, because it's not currently. So yeah, we'll see. And I also like I hope the DSA investigation against Grok goes the way it should.
Yeah, that's we have hope, and as well, maybe there will be ground for litigation in case it doesn't. Like there's always other means available to people that have been affected and hurt. And so I'm now going to ask you the very, very last question before Giacomo reminds me, and he's right, that of course the podcast has a duration. I wanted to ask you, maybe aside from the newsletter that our listeners will be finding, they can find it on Substack, as we saw, and on LinkedIn, and also on Blue Sky and X, if I'm not wrong, and it's called DigiProgress. Do you have any other suggestions, for example, of things that our listeners could be looking at to understand a bit more what we're talking about, which is the clarification principle behind the digital omnibus and how that kind of entails and intertwines with the concept of the 28th regime and making business in the free market of the European Union a bit easier and a bit swifter?
So like other resources, basically. Yeah, let me just take this moment to say I think Legal for Tech is doing a fantastic job. I'm not just saying that because I'm here, and I know it's not super great to advertise to your own audience, but yeah, no, really, like I think you have your guests are bang on, like true experts, and especially there are two technology podcasts in Brussels that have gone away. So there was one by Euractiv and there's one by Global Council, which I don't think is coming back. So anyway, so keep doing what you're doing. It's really cool and appreciated. In terms of other resources, I think you may have also interviewed Laura Corelli. I mean, yeah, I don't think Laura and I would agree on the balance of risks and benefits of technology, but yeah, you won't find a more credible expert on AI than her, and she does really great work on Substack. There's another Substack called the EU Artificial Intelligence Newsletter by Risto Ook and somebody and the Future Life Institute. Again, it's they do so well to be neutral. They share different kinds of views in a very like intellectually honest way, and it's right on the money in terms of what people are talking about. Um, Here in Brussels, there's another one by a lawyer. You'll be glad to hear. He's called Mikolai. I'm not going to try and butcher his surname, but it's called How Law Influences EU Tech, I think. Really good on everything to do with like omnibus, data protection, and the interaction between some of the regulations we were discussing. So those are a few slightly more, I guess, lighthearted, but still relevant for some of the things we've been talking about. Is the Tech Reckoner. It's by a AI ethicist, but shows like a very good understanding of like some of the global business stuff, and actually also an expert on China. So it's interesting from a more global perspective.
That's brilliant. We will, our listeners will find all the information about everything we're talking about, and of course, your recommendations in our show notes. And I know that Giacomo is already typing down all the names that you mentioned. And I know that Mikolai you mean, and sadly, yes, his surname is impossible to pronounce. So, Mikolai, you're more than welcome to come on the podcast and help us pronounce your surname as well, aside from maybe kind of fostering this
Yeah.
conversation that's been going on.
Oh, let me
And
add one more. There's one more called, I think it's called the digitalfairness.eu or something by James Tamman. It's also very good for like DFA and fitness check stuff.
that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Patrick. It was a pleasure to meet you, and it will be a pleasure for us to follow DG Progress. We hope to listen and read the interview that you just referred to, and we'll let you know if we like it.
Super. Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun. Keep up what you're doing.
Thanks.
Thank
And
you.
this was all from the Legal for Tech, the podcast.
This episode was brought to you in partnership with DG Beetle. DG Beetle helps privacy professionals to stay up to date with the most important European documents in the AI, data and digital space every day. Curious to know more? Check out the link in our show notes.